21-year-old Mary Jane Thompson was last seen leaving her part-time job and never returning home. She was discovered 2 days later behind a warehouse in West Dallas, prompting the police to begin their search for the person responsible. With DNA being the only piece of evidence left at the crime scene, it took investigators 38 years to finally crack the case. Mary Jane Thompson was born on October 5, 1962, in Houston, Texas, and she had a warm and affectionate upbringing within her loving family. Throughout her school years, she cultivated numerous friendships. With a dream of becoming a model, Mary Jane embarked on a journey that led her to Los Angeles, where she resided for a period while chasing her aspirations. She made the decision to relocate back to Texas, but this time to the city of Dallas. At the age of 21, she found herself juggling 2 jobs to help pay for acting and modeling classes, which she hoped would help her break into the industry. Mary worked as a waitress and at a florist shop, dedicating every spare moment to chasing her dream of becoming a model. She maintained this hectic pace for approximately 6 months. On February 11, 1984, Mary made a phone call to her mother, explaining that she was heading to a clinic due to an ear infection that had been bothering her. That evening, Mary left her part-time waitress job and took the bus as her mode of transportation. When she arrived at the clinic, it had already closed, prompting her to wait for the next bus to return home. From that moment onward, no one had seen Mary, and she did not make any contact with her relatives. Her family didn't immediately report her missing, as they understood that Mary was juggling 2 jobs along with her acting and modeling classes, often leaving her with little time to reach out to her parents. 2 days later, the Dallas Police Department received a call about a discovery near abandoned railroad tracks. The exact location was behind a warehouse on the 2300 block of Irving Boulevard. Detectives arrived at the scene and found the lifeless body of a young girl who showed signs of strangulation. No identification documents were found, making it challenging to quickly identify the victim, but eventually they determined that the victim was Mary Jane Thompson. Medical experts examined the body and determined that Mary Jane Thompson had been killed several days prior. During that time, the area where her body was discovered was mainly filled with warehouses, many of which were vacant. This explains why it took 2 days for Mary to be found. Crime scene investigators also concluded that the perpetrator used Mary's leg warmers to strangulate her. Additionally, Mary had also been subjected to sexual assault, which allowed criminologists to extract the perpetrator's biological material. This evidence was entirely unusable back then, as it was impossible to extract a DNA sample from it, let alone determine the perpetrator's identity. The police were still required to store such samples in the laboratory, hoping that as technology advanced, these unsolved cases might eventually find resolution in the future. After an extensive examination of the scene where Mary's murder occurred, the investigators came up empty-handed. There wasn't any other evidence to be found. The warehouse behind which her body was discovered was situated approximately 3 miles from the clinic in a secluded industrial area. Through conversations with the girl's friends and relatives, they were able to construct a more precise timeline of events. It became apparent that, as the clinic had already closed, Mary had to walk a significant distance to reach the bus stop to return home. It was likely at this bus stop that the criminal targeted her. He likely attacked her, loaded her into a vehicle, and transported her to the location where her lifeless body was eventually discovered, leaving behind no evidence. The investigators began to look into previously convicted individuals who lived and worked in the area, but this yielded no results. The police were convinced that the perpetrator was familiar with the area, as he not only managed to abduct the girl from a location where it went entirely unnoticed, but also transported her to abandoned railway tracks, hidden from prying eyes. There wasn't a single witness who could provide even a fleeting glimpse of Mary Jane that evening. In those years, there were no surveillance cameras, except for a few on the most prominent city streets. The case quickly reached a dead end. The case was eventually transferred to the Cold Case Squad, which was responsible for periodically revisiting such investigations. This only occurred 25 years later, in 2009, when the Dallas Police Department decided to reopen the case using new technologies. Forensic experts managed to extract a DNA sample from the biological material found on Mary Jane's body. Unfortunately, they found nothing. They ran the sample through all existing databases, but couldn't find the owner's identity. This suggested two scenarios. Either the perpetrator may have never been previously prosecuted for serious crimes, or their crimes occurred during a time when DNA samples were not routinely collected. The only option left for the detectives was to periodically check the DNA sample against the databases, hoping that the owner would eventually be apprehended for some other criminal activity. Cases like these occur quite frequently, and it's through these efforts that investigators manage to solve even the most seemingly hopeless cases. Once again, this case was revisited 9 years later in 2018. This time, the detectives, realizing the significance of a potential breakthrough, sought assistance from an independent organization called SAKI, which is dedicated to solving violent crimes. Together with detectives, they worked tirelessly to secure more resources for the latest DNA research. It was only in 2020 that the FBI became involved in the investigation, further pushing the efforts to crack the case. During that time, the Bureau had accumulated a significant number of old, unsolved cases where investigators possessed DNA samples from perpetrators, yet they struggled to locate them. As technology advanced, there emerged a promising avenue for resolving these long-standing cases: genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy, a huge advancement in forensic science, works like this. Specialists analyze DNA from an unidentified person with advanced equipment, forming a genetic profile to identify their relatives. These relatives' DNA can end up in databases through two main channels. First, if relatives have criminal records, their DNA goes into the FBI database. Second, individuals voluntarily share their DNA with publicly accessible databases for genealogy and ancestry research. This 2-year process began with experts identifying distant relatives using a DNA sample. The most challenging phase was sifting through the biographies of several thousand people. Their task was to eliminate unsuitable candidates and pinpoint the most likely suspect. The screening process involved various criteria, such as age and place of residence at the time of the murder. To complicate matters, DNA databases only lead experts to a specific group of relatives without actual DNA samples for comparison. Therefore, the only solution was to select the most suitable candidate and obtain their DNA. In 2022, the detectives received the name of a potential suspect in Mary Jane's case. After taking a look into his background, they decided to surveil him, patiently waiting for the right opportunity. Eventually, the police obtained an item from which they could extract a DNA sample. After conducting the necessary tests in the laboratory, they confirmed that his DNA perfectly matched the sample found on Mary's body. This man was identified as 60-year-old Edward Morgan from Dallas. As suspected, he lived remarkably close to the murder scene, about half a mile away, at the time when he was only 22 years old. In February, Morgan was apprehended and officially charged with murder. He is currently in custody, awaiting trial, with a bail set at $500,000. The police have not yet revealed any specific details about Morgan's life, which will only come to light during the trial. During the press conference, investigators expressed with confidence that Morgan would be found guilty and face punishment for his heinous crime, including the possibility of the death penalty in the state of Texas. Jane's parents did not live long enough to witness this moment. Her father, who had relentlessly pursued justice for his daughter, passed away in 2020, and her mother even earlier. Among her immediate family, only a sister remained, who received a shocking call from the police after 38 years. Mary Jane's sister had consistently posted birthday messages to her on social media and maintained an unwavering hope for a resolution to this case. Upon learning of Edward Morgan's arrest, she expressed her desire that he spend the remainder of his life behind bars. Furthermore, she vowed to attend every court hearing until the final chapter of this case is written.